I was 18 at the time. I had gone to my family's lake house with my friends. My parents didn't want to let me because it was so cold, but I convinced them somehow. We were 4 friends: Michael, Henry, Jake, and me. Our goal was to go for a walk by the lake, walk in the woods, and drink some alcohol. Jake had a car. We made a plan. Jake would pick us all up. Jake had picked up my other friends before he came to pick me up. We headed to the lake house. We stopped at a gas station on the way. We bought something to eat and some alcohol. We arrived at the lake house around noon. Almost all of my childhood memories were in this house. Swimming in the lake with my dad, the meals my mom made for us, they all came to mind. We packed our things up in the house. We were planning on staying for 2 days in total. We played pool to pass the time. We were hungry. We ate some snacks and drank some alcohol. The sun was about to set. Jake said he was bored and wanted to see the lake. A walk in the woods would be good for all of us. It was cold. We put on our coats and started walking in the forest. The distance between the forest and our house wasn't very long anyway. It was about 150 yards on average. We were walking in the forest. Henry was telling us funny things and making us laugh. But every step I took, my childhood came to mind. I knew this forest like the back of my hand. This was exactly where I used to play with my brother, mother, and father. When I was a child, I used to play hide and seek with my family in this forest. While I was lost in these dreams, I realized that my eyes were filled with tears. I pulled myself together immediately. My house was about a 10-minute walk from the lake. The lake was starting to appear in the distance. At that moment, a dragging sound came from the forest just to our left. We had all heard this sound and were wondering what it was. We looked carefully in the direction where the sound was coming from. I saw something like a shadow about 40 yards in front of us, but I couldn't make out exactly what it was. I asked my friends, "Did you see what I saw?" They all nodded silently. We were all trying to figure out what those shadows were. We decided to get a little closer. We approached very quietly and carefully. When we got about 10 yards closer, we realized that the shadows we saw belonged to 2 men. They were both holding the end of a sack and dragging it on the ground. It was obvious that the thing in the sack was very heavy. At that moment, Jake whispered, "Should we follow?" Henry said, "Let's follow. It'll be very exciting." We started to follow the men. Their voices could not reach us, but it was clear that they were arguing. When we approached the lake shore, we did not leave the forest, but continued to follow the men. There was a boat on the lake shore. The men were dragging the sack in their hands towards the boat. We watched the men carefully. We were very curious about what they were doing. What was in the sack? Or was it a body? While these thoughts were running through my mind, one of my friends stepped on a tree branch on the ground. It made a lot of noise. I felt like my heart was going to stop. I was praying that the men did not hear this sound, but they suddenly turned and looked at us. We were in the forest. The chances of them seeing us were slim. But Michael suddenly started running away. He was panicking. Every step he took made the leaves on the forest floor sound. When I looked back out of the corner of my eye, I saw the men running towards us. They knew we were watching them now. We all started running towards the house in fear. I couldn't run very fast due to the alcohol. I was staggering from side to side. My friends weren't much different than me, but I can't tell you the fear I felt at that moment. There was definitely a body in that sack. Otherwise, why would those men run after us? I was lost in these thoughts. We were all out of breath. Michael suddenly stopped running. He was having trouble breathing. We all stood next to Michael. We told him we had to run, but he was very tired. When we looked back, we couldn't see anyone. This relaxed us a little, so we let Michael rest for a minute or two. I was very tired too. This break would do me good. We were all out of breath. Jake asked in fear. What do we do now? Due to the adrenaline rush, we hadn't thought of calling the police until then. In fact, I had seen the men running towards us out of the corner of my eye. I wasn't really sure what I saw. That's why I didn't want to call the police. We had to make sure we were being followed because there was a high probability that they wouldn't believe us if we called the police. We were all drunk. While we were debating whether to call the police or not, we heard a crackling sound from behind us in the woods. They were still after us. The sound we heard resembled the footsteps of a person walking slowly. We started running towards the house in panic. The road seemed to never end. Jake suddenly shouted, "They're behind us!" I didn't know what to do. All I knew was that I was very scared. Finally, the house started to appear from the woods. We continued running with all our might. We reached the house after running for about 2 more minutes. We called the police immediately. We made sure that all the doors and windows were closed. The police told us the same thing. "Close the doors and windows, don't leave the place you are, the teams are on their way." We were all looking out a window toward the entrance to the forest. We didn't know if those guys were still after us, but it seemed certain that they wouldn't let us go. Henry couldn't speak because he was scared, while Michael was sitting in a corner staring blankly at the surroundings. At that moment, a rock hit the window we were looking out of. We retreated in panic, went upstairs, and locked ourselves in a room. We were looking out from behind the curtain. I was praying to God for the police to come soon, because up until that moment, I had thought that what we were experiencing could only happen in the movies. Just then, I started hearing voices coming from the front door of the house. They were trying to get in. I was looking out the window, but since there was a porch at the front of the house, I couldn't see who was trying to force the door. The police hadn't arrived yet. It couldn't have been anyone else but those guys we saw, because our lake house was far from the other houses. I heard the door break. Henry shouted, "What are we going to do now?" Jake was holding me tightly by the arm. Frankly, I didn't know what to do either. I was hoping that the door of the room would keep the men out until the police arrived. The police arrived shortly after. When the police sirens were heard, we could hear the men running inside the house. The police were right in front of the door. I was hoping that those men would be caught. Not even a minute later, I heard a voice from our door. "Kids, you're safe. Open the door. Police." I was so happy at that moment, but I still couldn't trust it. "How do I know you're a police officer?" I shouted. He showed his badge under the door. I was really happy that we were saved. I opened the door immediately. The police had caught the men. We told the police about the sack the men were dragging. The police took all of our information and told us that we could go home if we wanted. They would call to give us information. We quickly packed up our things, got in our car, and drove away. 2 days later, the police called. As we had predicted, they had found a body in the sack by the lake. I was in shock. I didn't know what to say. I thanked the police and hung up. I hadn't realized how much danger we were in until that moment. If those men had caught us, we might not be alive today. We were very lucky to have survived, but I don't think I'll ever forget that incident. It often comes to my dreams, and I get psychological support for it. Still, I thank God that we survived. Tom, Jason, and I have been friends since college. We go camping together every year. We all live in different cities, so we get our annual leave on the same day every year so we can go camping and see each other. We take turns choosing where to camp. That year it was Tom's turn to choose. Tom had chosen the forest area that was off limits. It was actually an abandoned mining town. Although we hesitated, we couldn't resist Tom's insistence. We thought we could walk in the forest and visit the mining town. It would be an adventure for all of us. It was going to be a weekend getaway for us. Since we were coming from different cities, we met at a common point. We drove the rest of the way in my car. The campsite was about 3 hours away. We reached the campsite. We hid the car on the forest road so that no one would see it. After all, we were in a prohibited area. After setting up our camp near the mining camp, we went for a walk to explore the area. The area where we would camp was a quiet place according to my observations. The abandoned mining area was clearly visible from the forest. It was getting dark, so we headed back to our campsite. We lit our campfire and prepared dinner. After eating, we chatted around the campfire. We hadn't seen each other for a year. The conversation was so good that none of us noticed how time flew by. It was 2 a.m. Tomorrow was going to be a tiring day, so we decided to sleep. Since my tent was for 4 people, we all decided to sleep in my tent. My sleep was interrupted by a strange sound coming from the mine. It sounded like someone was hammering something outside. There was a lot of wind outside, so I thought the sound was coming from the old iron gate outside the mine. I woke up to Jason's voice. It was morning. We spent the day exploring the old mining town. We didn't realize how our day had passed, between the crumbling mine entrances and the old buildings that were falling apart. We returned to camp to rest and eat. We were all very tired. The sun would set in a few hours. We ate and sat around the campfire for a while. We couldn't stand the tiredness. We all went to the tent to sleep. The sound I heard last night interrupted our sleep again. This time, we all woke up. Tom took his flashlight and went to see where the sound was coming from. He didn't listen to us, even though we insisted that he not go. After 10 minutes, Tom still hadn't returned. Jason and I went to look for Tom. There was no sign of Tom. We were both very worried. After searching for a long time, we found footprints in the mine. The tracks led to the entrance of the mine. We didn't dare to enter the mine. It was forbidden to enter the area we were in, but we had no choice but to call the police. Our phones were in the tent, so we went back to the tent. We thought maybe those footprints didn't belong to Tom. When we went back to the tent, Tom was still not there. We looked for his phone, but he was in the tent. We waited another half hour. When Tom didn't return, I called the police. I told them our situation and where we were. The police came 45 minutes later. We told the police what had happened. We told them about the footprint at the mine entrance. The police and the fire brigade had also arrived. They entered the mine wearing their masks against the danger of poisonous gas. They came with Tom about half an hour later. Tom was unconscious. They found him unconscious. When we spent the night in the hospital, the police took our statements. Tom came to in the morning, but he didn't remember anything. The police said he might have been affected by the gas. That was the reason why the mine area was off limits. Tom didn't remember anything about the incident. We never went camping again except for safe camping areas. After a busy week, I decided to relax a bit. I rented a small cabin in the forest far from the city. It seemed like a quiet, peaceful place. Actually, it was exactly what I needed, some peace. I packed my bag and set off. The narrow, winding roads through the forest along the way took me away from the stress of work. How good it will be to spend the weekend in nature without thinking about anything, I thought. It was dark when I arrived at the cabin. It was a small, old cabin, but it was enough for me. It was a little cold inside the cabin, so I lit the fireplace. I looked around the rooms. It had a simple but warm atmosphere. It was a one-room place, a small kitchen, an old sofa in the other room, and shelves full of books. The bedroom was at the back, at the end of the hallway. Everything was going as planned, but I felt lonely. This is the price of being in a quiet and peaceful place. Loneliness. I went outside to spend some time and sat in front of the hut. There was no other sound around except the sound of birds and trees. It was quiet, but after a while I noticed something strange. A sound was coming from inside the forest. It wasn't very distinct, but I could hear it. It was like something was moving in the bushes. Was it an animal or a person? Frankly, I was a little scared. These are the side effects of being alone. I tried to calm myself down. It's probably a fox or a squirrel, I thought. The sound I heard was slowly approaching me. It felt like it was wandering around the hut. The sounds would stop for a few minutes, then start again. I felt restless. I went inside, locked the door, and turned off the lights. I listened to the sounds for a while. The sounds I heard stopped completely. I guess I was being too sensitive. I needed to calm down a bit. I had a restlessness inside me. I couldn't control myself. I read a book for a while before going to sleep. I thought I would calm down, but my mind was constantly on the sound I heard. It was late. I was tired and very sleepy. I went to my bedroom to sleep. Within 5 minutes, the sound started again. I tried to find where the sound was coming from. The sounds were coming from just outside the window. I was scared. I listened to the sounds without moving in bed. I tried to figure out what the sounds I was hearing were. It was like someone was walking around the hut, then a light tapping. Something was tapping on the glass of the window. It was definitely not an animal anymore. There was someone outside my hut. I picked up my phone, but it had no signal. So I thought desperately about what to do. Should I open the curtains and look outside? What would I do if I looked outside and saw someone there? If there was no one, I would feel a little better. Or was it better not to look at all? At that moment, I heard another footstep. It was coming from right in front of the door. I was very scared, but I didn't move. The sound stopped suddenly. I didn't dare to go out to my car. I couldn't sleep until morning. As soon as the sun rose, I packed up my things. Even though I was terrified, I opened the door and went outside. I saw footprints around the cabin. They were human footprints. Whoever it was had walked right around the cabin. My weekend getaway didn't go as I thought it would. I got in my car and sped away. I never found out what happened there that night, but I'm sure I'll never go back to that cabin again. We rented an Airbnb with my friends Lisa and Emma for the weekend. The area where the Airbnb was located was very isolated. It was in the forest, far from the city. There was a very beautiful lake close to the Airbnb. The Airbnb had a very large veranda and jacuzzi. We put our stuff in our rooms. We walked in the forest for a while and explored the area. Then we went to the lake to swim. Although the weather was warm, the water was very cold. We swam for about half an hour and then came back. Lisa suggested watching a movie on the computer. After eating our meal, we started watching a movie. After the movie was over, we sat on the veranda and chatted. We were in high spirits. At that moment, a tall man in his 40s came. "Did you like the atmosphere?" he asked. He said that if we didn't like the atmosphere, he knew a very nice place and we could go together. The man's relaxed attitude made us uncomfortable. We thanked him and said that we were happy with the environment we were in. The man was not very happy with this answer. He said something we didn't understand and left. This situation bothered me a lot. In fact, it would be more accurate to say it scared me. All our joy suddenly disappeared. We chatted with the girls a little more. At that moment, I saw that the man had not left, but was watching us from a distance. I told the girls, "Let's go inside." They did not understand what had happened. Inside, I told the girls that the man had not left and was watching us. We closed our door. We were scared. I immediately called the person we rented the Airbnb from and explained the situation to them. He said that there was nothing to be afraid of, that he had received similar complaints before. He knew the person. He was harmless, mentally unstable, and that there was no need to be afraid. I felt relieved after the conversation. I also explained the situation to the girls. We watched some TV. At that moment, the doorbell rang. I looked out the window of the door, but there was no one there. I must have heard wrong. I asked the girls. They had not heard anything. After eating a snack, we decided to go to sleep. We were tired anyway. I woke up from my sleep to Lisa's voice. "There is someone outside trying to force the door," she said. When I looked out the window, I saw that the person at the door was the man who had been harassing us. I immediately called the police. Emma came to us at that moment. We locked the door of the room. We thought that even if he entered the house, we would be safe in the room until the police arrived. We had never encountered such a situation before. We were all very scared. The man kept trying to force the door. Emma started crying. While we were trying to calm Emma down, the police arrived. They caught the man. The police said, "Don't be afraid, you're safe." But we couldn't stay there anymore. I called the person we rented the Airbnb from and explained the situation. We quickly packed up and went back to our homes.